Wow, what an honor. Today we're with Jim Clyburn, the House Majority Whip from South Carolina. That means that Congressman Clyburn is one of the most important members of Congress and is part of the leadership team that runs the United States House of Representatives. We in our industry have known Congressman Clyburn for a long time, and we start today by sending greetings from our friends in South Carolina, starting with Hal and Diana Stevenson from Grace. Of course, Doug McFarland from MAC, who runs the state association, and Pudge Roger from Coastal, who is on the OAAA National Board of Directors, Scott Shockley from Columbia, from Lamar, and last but not least, our longtime mutual friend and public servant, Glenn Willis from Adams. So Congressman, we feel at home in South Carolina. I'm going to make you feel at home. And you know, you have a lot of friends in our industry from South Carolina. If we could jump right in, most everybody who analyzed the presidential election would call your endorsement of President Biden in South Carolina a pivotal event in the nomination process in 2020. For us, we were noticing that there was a billboard part of your narrative. If we could start out, if you could retell that story and the importance of billboards in that story.
Well, thank you very much for having me. As you know, my late wife was a real astute observer of politics. I often tell the story that when we would sit in church together, she would always have a notepad. And a lot of people may have thought that she had been keeping notes of the sermon. She would always be taking notes of all the people and the reactions these people had, most especially toward me. And she told me early on when I first ran for office back in 1970, she says, whatever form of advertising you do is all right with me. However, you must have billboards. And she always insisted that I had to have billboards. And so I did. And so that's how I got to know so many of the people in your industry, many of whom names you called this morning. And I even shared that with Joe Biden. And your folks in South Carolina will tell you that after she passed away, Joe Biden bought some billboards to honor her memory and her relationship with him. But Emily just always insisted that it was not a campaign, in her opinion, if you didn't have billboards. And so I followed her advice, and I did so for 58 years.
Well, that is a great story and a powerful narrative. As a customer, Congressman, you're a longtime buyer of the product. Can you share with us what you get out of it as a customer? What's the value to you?
Well, you know, as I said, my wife was such an astute observer of things. I just came to the conclusion that anything she felt strongly about had to be worth doing. And I myself, when I'm traveling, I tend to read the messages that are on billboards. I look for little things that I nurse myself, how many words are used to get across the message, and which ones I think are most effective. And I try to use this, not just for a message of the day, but if you're doing a pamphlet or a postcard, I tend to emulate and sometimes even kind of replicate things that I see on billboards. And I do believe that people read them I think that many people are entertained by that. When I was a little boy, my dad used to pastor 2 Sundays of the month over in Orangeburg, and we lived in Sumter. And so every second and fourth weekend, we would travel to Orangeburg. And my dad played games with us to keep us entertained. I had 2 brothers. And the billboards counted into that, and little messages. And to this day, I still remember those little messages, Burma Shave. I don't know if you know about that, but you would have these little things, but every few, maybe every 1/10 of a mile or something, there would be one message, and you sit there trying to get the whole message to the end. So, I just grew up with it, and it's still with me.
Well, that's a great segue to our next point. America is rolling out perhaps the most ambitious mass vaccination program in our history. And the success of that depends on a large portion of the population being vaccinated. And if we look at the challenges, there are many in terms of rural isolation, supply, and plus with some hesitancy to get the vaccine. With your background in observing those Burma Shave signs and your story about growing up and the travel from one place to the other, Congressman, do you think that outdoor advertising, out-of-home advertising could be part of the messenger to overcome some of these challenges, to communicate strong information for vaccination?
As you know, I chair the House Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus, and it's my job to help us get effective, efficient, and I call equitable use of all the resources that we spend on this pandemic. And I strongly urge any jurisdiction that's trying to get that message out to utilize outdoor advertising, utilize billboards, if you please, because I do believe that especially in rural communities, people read these billboards, and if we get effective messages and effective messengers, not just the message, but sometimes you got to have a good messenger. It will be very effective in this. And so I feel very strongly that should be in the mix and will be a very efficient and effective use of our resources.
Congressman, on your point about the messenger, I listened the other day to Clarence Anthony, former mayor from South Florida, now leader of the National League of Cities, and a CEO from the YMCA, and both of them pointed to sort of trusted voices as a fundamental to the messaging here. And I think they meant by that local messengers, your local pastor, your local doctor, your local pastor. Do you share that view that that's probably a better messenger? And could that be a way to tie into your point about billboards?
Absolutely. You have to localize these things. I think one very popular politician of old used to say, all politics are local. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do is to fight off some history here. I'm old enough to remember, as I said on yesterday at a hearing I had up here on the pandemic, I remember the polio vaccine. There were 2 of them. The salt vaccine was a shot in your arm. The Sabin vaccine was a little drop of serum on a lump of sugar. And I also remember where those vaccines were distributed. I remember the Tuskegee experiment and what that did to the psyche of the African-American community. So we have to take all that into account and do what we can to overcome that past history. We can't erase history, but we can do the things that are necessary to overcome whatever may be the current effects of that past history. And that's one of them, a lot of doubt that people have about vaccinations. And so we have to use people with credibility in the communities. I happen to know Anthony, and I think he's an outstanding person, and he is correct when he says you got to localize this thing. You got to get people that ones you're trying to reach or familiar with, and that is what's really important. A lot of people think if you get one of these, nobody's got anything against big time sports figures or people that you may see in movies, but it's the people that you interact with every day that have the most impression, and I think the real lasting impression.
Well, that's a great point. If we could use our remaining time to go through some top issues in Congress, and let's start with privacy. Perhaps inspired by what happened in California at the ballot box, other states are looking at data restrictions and privacy protections. Some would say, well, that calls for a national approach by Congress. I think another side of the question would be, well, if the states are passing these privacy bills, why should Congress act? In your view, do you think there's a shot at a privacy bill before the midterm elections, or is this kind of a longer term congressional action?
Well, I think there's a shot at it, but our challenge is not just getting things done in the House. These kinds of bills, we always say that the House of Representatives, where people run every 2 years, is the people's house. It is the one that is closest to the people. And so we tend to get these kinds of responses from the House and not able to get them through the Senate. So if you ask me if the House of Representatives will have a good shot at doing it, my answer to that is yes. Will the full Congress have a real good shot at doing it by the midterms? I doubt it.
So if we were going to take $100 and go to Vegas and bet on whether there was going to be a privacy bill, you wouldn't make that bet before the midterm?
Before the midterms, I would not make that bet, though it might be a good bet to make.
Okay. On another topic, Congressman, the American public opinion on cannabis has changed over the last generation, and we see that at the ballot box where Mississippi voted for medical marijuana in November. The Virginia legislature has just moved for legalization, in fact, moved up the implementation date to July 1 of this year. So state after state, red state, blue state, purple state, are acting on legalization. Does this mean that Congress will nationalize a reform? And if so, what do you think the starting point would be in terms of that normalization of treatment of cannabis?
I'm going to take a look at the MORE Act that the House of Representatives passed in the last term, and I think we'll probably do it again. And I think that the same measuring stick should be applied to this act as well. There are lots of things. The Senate's got these rules. We call it the filibuster. The filibuster today, though, is something totally different from what the filibuster was when I was learning politics. Filibuster today can be conducted from one spa downtown. You can sit in your spa and phone in your objection to something, and it's filibuster. You don't have to stand on the floor and make your arguments like you had to do back in the 50s and 60s when we thought that's what filibustering was. It's not that anymore. So we'll pass these things in the House. I think we'll pass that act again. What happens in the Senate? I just will not predict.
So again, you think that it's unlikely there would be a congressional action before the midterm on cannabis?
Well, once again, if you're limited to the midterms, I just don't know. A lot depends upon what happens in state legislatures. If there is something out there that starts to bubble up, the problem we got now is that most state legislatures have pretty much finished their work. Will finish their work by the beginning of the summer, and Congress really, because of redistricting this year or after this year, every member of the House has got to run in the new district. Our district will definitely change. And then the question then becomes, what will the district be like? And so people have been used to their congressional district over the last 10 years. It's going to be different for them in the next election. And that's what makes this so dicey. And that's why I am not going to predict what the outcome would be on much of this, because everybody is going to be a little bit antsy. They're waiting on the Census Bureau to get those numbers out, as they say they will in the fall of the year, the numbers dealing with redistricting. And people are very unsure of who their constituents are going to be. They're a bit reticent about what laws they are going to support or what legislation they will support.
Well, thanks for that analysis. We have a new Secretary of Transportation, former mayor from Indiana, new administration, new staff at DOT. But I think up and down the line, there would be a definition of what we would call infrastructure legislation or a highway bill or a roads and bridges bill that they would want that to be green. And I was wondering if you could share with us what the definition of green means when you apply that to infrastructure. The numbers are big. It's almost $2 trillion in terms of the president's plan. But if in the end of the day, when that passes, it's defined as green, Congressman, what does that mean?
That simply means protecting our environment. I think that people tend to equate all of this with one little philosophy that has been expressed, and I call it that because it's not any kind of a legislative thing yet, the so-called Green New Deal. What we are talking about here is having an infrastructure bill that preserves the integrity of our environment. That's what we're trying to do. And Buttigieg was in my whip meeting on yesterday, and I'm very pleased with the program he has outlined. He is going to be the point guy on the infrastructure. The president has assigned 4 other cabinet members to work with him on that, and I'm going to be working very closely with them. But what I would say to anybody, we are in a new economy. Advertising is different than it used to be, and we got to remember that infrastructure is different than it used to be. When Abraham Lincoln was proposing the transatlantic railroad, he wasn't proposing air travel. Air travel is infrastructure. Today, broadband is infrastructure. In fact, when the internet first came out, you may recall, we used to call it the information highway. And so, as I said many times before, we have to treat the information highway the same way we treat the interstate highway. And so I think that Joe Biden is doing what is necessary to respond to the times. And I think that's why he's getting so much support from the American people for what he's doing.
Well, Congressman, this has been a great conversation and a great honor to share a few minutes with you. And going back to the first few minutes of our conversation, if we ever need a person who is an expert at summarization, an expert about billboard advertising, we're going to come to you to help you write copy. So thank you so much for your time. Greetings from South Carolina, and all the best from your friends in out-of-home advertising. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Thank you.